I think most people who know me would consider me a leftist along the American political spectrum. However, if you turn on your mainstream media sources, you'll find I verge from them significantly. For example, I persistently criticize President Obama, and I do so better than most Republicans. I support many Second Amendment arguments. I'm critical of unions, even though I think they're necessary. And I believe the taxes should eventually be cut significantly, and I'm adamantly opposed to big government. Now, you might say, Colby, how's that even possible? You don't sound like a leftist at all. You're more like a right-wing neocon. But here's what I find interesting. I've been involved in the anti-war movement for some time. I was an organizer with Occupy Wall Street, and I moved to Palestine to teach English, so obviously some very leftist endeavors. The more I talked to people in these intense and often polarized political settings, the more I came to realize this crazy truth that is mostly ignored in the mainstream media. People don't disagree the way they think they do. Now you might say, wait, Colby, what do you mean? I watch the news, I read the New York Times, I watch Fox News, I watch MSNBC. I even turn on CNN when I want to get my news from a Obi-Wan Kenobi type hologram. And these people don't agree with each other. But what all these news sources have in common, they all support corporate capitalism, a version of economics that we currently live under. And why do they do that? Because they're all corporations. Now you might argue further, you guys are good debaters. You might say, well, I don't hear them support corporate capitalism, and I would respond exactly. They barely talk about it and they never challenge it. And silence in the face of oppression is consent, and there's no way to get around it. So the institutions that screw up our society are the ones that give us most of the information we're supposed to use in making the choices that dictate our lives, including legitimizing their power. They suppress our access to accurate information. The media don't debate the legitimacy of our corporate or banking structure. They debate what rules we should and shouldn't put in place to mitigate their effects. They don't debate the impacts of these overinflated institutions on our government. They debate campaign reform and tax policy that keeps the institutions in power and the same system in place. The result is that challenges to the overall structure are omitted from the discussion. They frame debates in terms of Republican versus Democrat, or liberal versus conservative. Now, the Democrats, they challenge the Republicans. The liberals are challenging the conservatives. It's like, who's on offense, who's on defense, and it's all very dramatic and we can barely take our eyes off it. But while we gaze wide-eyed in awe, very few of us look down and see the platform on which they stand to make these debates is an illusion. The real American conservative and American liberal don't differ that much. At their core, neither of these ideologies is fundamentally opposed to each other. Most people agree on key points. Corporations and banks have too much power. Government is too big and unaccountable. The people are not represented and we don't have self-determination. The real polarization in this country and around the world is extreme wealth, that is, politicians, CEOs, and bankers, and their institutions versus the rest of us. But the media barely touches the impact of corporate and banking structure and that it has on our political system and how detrimental it is to our democracy. They call a colossal collapse a trend, a natural flux, and they say it will bounce back. Then when we find out later these problems our nation faces are based on individual action or on institutional failure, they treat them as isolated incidents rather than systematic flaws. They don't challenge the system that allows corporate and banking institutions to function the way they do, in a way that creates a need for services on such a massive scale. This version of capitalism, that is corporate capitalism, funnels wealth and power upward, and it creates an ever-expanding gap between the owners of capital and the workers and the poor, which increases tensions exponentially. But what if we could push that debate further and say, what if the structure was different? What if corporations couldn't get away with damaging our society on a large scale? Or what if they couldn't exist the way that they do, in a way that depletes our global resources? What if the government didn't exist in its current capacity? And in other words, what if the people actually controlled the government? Then we might not need these policies to protect us from the effects of that system. We all seem to realize that the politicians we elect don't represent us, and that voting is a relatively insignificant exercise in political participation, where we choose between two very similar and equally unappealing oligarchs. So why does the media fail to have a real debate about it? Because they're corporations. They let the conversation expand for just enough to let us have room to fight with each other, but not enough to challenge their own legitimacy. Now, I argue in Another World is Possible that the political and business leaders maintain these systems through their manipulation of the discourse and perpetuations of assumed truths, including arbitrary economic calculations. But you're going to have to pick up a copy of Another World is Possible for $15.95 plus tax for that thought-provoking and witty assessment. For now, just understand that my point is that we take many things to be true that are only part true or outright false, and we don't debate or challenge them. They became the foundation of our knowledge and part of our common discourse, and as a result, they became the platform on which we build our own debates. But we never challenged the validity of the foundation itself. We then debate and create policy in an intellectual bubble that ignores many more real factors than it considers. And we make arguments that may be true and make sense in this bubble, but lose all legitimacy when the realities outside the bubble are considered. Now I ask you, how can we have a functioning democracy if we're not having a real public debate and we don't have accurate information and the leaders we elect don't represent us? The answer is we can't. How can we have freedom without real democracy? The answer? Can't. We can't have a functioning democracy in our current system. We talk about the government like it's democracy, but it's not. Real democracy means the people are the government. The people foster their own self-determination. It does not mean that some can do whatever they want. Because we live in a society, freedom means working together and creating the society that we want. It's an exercise of self-determination. This requires accurate information. Currently, our system of media ignores journalistic integrity, accurate information, and has been reduced to opinion-based, polarizing talk shows. Our news of today is the Maury Povich of the 90s. It's a hindrance to accurate information, and therefore a hindrance to a functioning democracy. Our government and political system is run by a group of wealthy people. They're relatively untouched by the people that they govern. They are inaccessible and unaccountable. The majority of the people who create the policies that make the decisions are unelected and unaccountable to us. At best, we vote in an up or down tally once every 2 years between either a Republican or a Democrat, and they're so similar that you can barely tell what party they're from half the time. Our own Lincoln Chafee started off as a Republican, then ran as an independent, and now he's going to run as a Democrat. Once we vote, these so-called leaders do whatever they want and keep the public out of the loop. They fight to prevent public access to information, they fill our television sets with rhetoric, and they attack anyone in the press who tries to hold them accountable, ignoring the Constitution. Whether we are talking about the two-party system, the affront on civil liberties by both parties, or merely the fact that one person cannot represent thousands of constituents, this system prevents self-determination, and therefore it's a hindrance to real democracy. And make no mistake, the field of economics itself is little more than arbitrary measures labeled as something more important. What economists consider a measure of a good economy ignores destruction and exploitation caused in creating the growth of that measure. What economists call quality of life has little to do with what quality of life means to an actual person. These narrow measures of society cut off real discussions of how people can function together in that society, and do little more than justify the status quo. Economics in its current state corrupts accurate information and is therefore a hindrance to real democracy. If Americans want real democracy and an economy which reflects a well-functioning democracy, it is up to us to create it. We cannot ask the government, big banks, and corporations to create our freedom and democracy. We need to live freely and democratically together. So this discussion is begging its own progression. The obvious question, what can we do about it? The solution to a lack of freedom is the exercise of more freedom. And the solution to a poor functioning democracy is the exercise of democracy. The first thing we need to do is examine how we consume news and information and realize that most of our opinions and beliefs are based on small amounts of information and information that's mostly inaccurate. It should then follow Because getting accurate information is so difficult, we can approach political, social, and economic conversations and opinions with a wide open mindset. And even when we view someone as a political opponent, we can find common beliefs and desires if we approach them this way. We must realize that truth is not found from seeking a midpoint between the right and the left. Rather, it comes from expanding beyond that narrow left and right debate and looking at the whole picture, the left, right, middle, and beyond. Of course, we should actually work to seek out real press from actual journalists and scholars and see what they have to say, but always put that into a wider context. You can go to the humannessproject.org, which is our website, to see some information about consuming news and resources to help you with this. Next, we can examine how we function in our daily lives and who we give power to through our actions. You can easily remove your money from big banks and put it in a local bank, even if it's just a small portion, if you want to keep money in the bigger bank because it's more convenient. You can find ethical ways to purchase your food and your consumer goods that keep your money out of the hands of companies like Walmart and Monsanto and give it to the businesses in your own community. Finally, you can begin to communicate with your friends and neighbors in ways that foster democracy and collectively impact your local political leaders. And eventually you can usurp them with your own political power. If you look in your event program, you'll see that we've provided you with 2 checklists to help you with this endeavor. The first one is if you would love to help me with my work, there are 8 quick and simple things you can do to help spread the word. I know these don't apply to everyone. For example, I know Mern is not on Twitter. Not yet, of course. But just take a look and see what you think. The second list is some simple things you can do to help create a better world for us all. We have the power to create what we want, the society that we want. If we want democracy, we can have it. If we want freedom, we can have that too. And if we want self-determination, that's right, we can have it. We can create this new world together. Another world is actually possible, and you will make it so.